Good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So, you and I both like this conversation. It's on words and what do they mean, and is it important, and why are we arguing about everything? And I mean, it's just like the silliest things we argue about, and I guess some of them have an underlying importance to the argument. For example, Republicans. The purpose of the Republican Party is to elect Republicans. So shocking. You make up words or slants to make the Democrats look bad, and vice versa. And somehow we as citizens are supposed to sort the prosecute and the defense out and find the truth in there somewhere, or at least justice. I get it. I get it. There's a reason why we argue about crap. But it just doesn't, I'm not sure it's good for our republic. That's the reason I'm interested in this topic. I'm hoping you're going to give us some instincts in U.S. history or some perspective that may be different to say, hey, John, yeah, you're right. We should do something different. But it's happened before, or it was bad at a certain time. But you want to talk about political violence? Well, let's talk Civil War. And so maybe that chance to have us have some perspective that we don't usually see in the social media or Main Street media. That's the reason I think this is important. I think you're going to add some value no matter what we want to debate. Let's debate better. What are your thoughts on the topic?
Yes, I certainly hope I will add some value to the discussion. And it's one of those cases where I think both you and I have a somewhat unique life experiences, and I've often thought, if you take everything I've ever done as a historian, it's probably hasn't changed as many lives as this other thing that I did in my life that is completely unrelated to being a historian. And if you think about everything we try to do and share our ideas, is it really going to be as significant as the fact that you founded a city? Like in my case, it almost feeds into this topic. But when I think about my actual career, one of the things that has probably changed the most lives is this bus and transit program that I created for students at my school. And in terms of, just what gets poor people to school and what makes the air cleaner, I don't know that anything I've ever done as a historian has helped more people than this other thing that I did. And I think about my experiences, and when you talk about your experiences in founding the town of Centennial, we both accomplished these things using essentially the same tools. And yeah, there are historical examples of when things like this have happened before. The ultimate example of this is almost the founding of the two parties. If you look at how the Democratic Party originally created itself and how the Republican Party originally created itself, it was pretty organic in that you were taking the beliefs of majorities, looking at what they have in common, and then creating a set of ideas around it. And it's no different than forming a city or creating a bus pass. You start with where people agree and say, well, since we all agree on this, can we just focus on doing this thing that we all agree on? And in terms of creating effective language, I think often the first step is to begin any conversation with an area of agreement and then move on from there.
So that's an interesting perspective to start with. So let me just ask a follow-up question to your perspective. It's a context statement in the guise of a question. No, all the advertisement, all the political money, all the PR, all the love and hate gets sent to the extremes now. There's no room for us to have where we have common ground, maybe very little niche. So I agree with you in principle, but it sure seems like society is going the exact opposite direction of what you're suggesting.
Well, sure, but it's like, are we trying to get something done, or are we trying to feed a dopamine hit? I'm assuming that this is a conversation about people who want to get something done. Because if you're talking about effective conversation, accomplishing goals, actually doing things, then I think it's much more effective to begin with what you have in common. Now, if you're trying to win an election or get someone to buy a product, then, by all means, engage the other parts of the human brain. But if you're trying to actually create something, especially if you want to do something that creates long-term positive change, you have to sort of do it the old-fashioned way, and there aren't any shortcuts to it. So I would say you are correct that it is one form of effective communication to be an advocate and to arouse hatreds, and that will accomplish the goals of raising money and exciting voters, et cetera. But if you want to actually make people's lives better, you got to go the other direction.
Interesting.
I mean, I can think of, I often think of, for instance, the accomplishments in civil rights during the Eisenhower administration, because his accomplishments were, in some cases, less flashy unless you look at them in retrospect. And then you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe all these things actually happened in the 1950s and under the Eisenhower administration.
Give an example or two.
Oh, it's just the Brown versus Board of Education movement. The voting rights movement in the South actually started in the 1950s.
Okay.
Integration of schools. The sit-in movement actually happened when Eisenhower was still president, and he said, when he was asked directly, "Who do you sympathize with?" he said, "I sympathize with the students in the sit-in movement." I mean, and that again, we kind of forget because it happened in 1960, and we think of it as being the 60s. But Eisenhower was still the president when that was going on, and in each of these cases, Eisenhower was positioning himself in such a way as to get people to take the next step that a decent person would take. And it was less flashy and maybe less satisfying than the person who makes the dramatic speech. But if you want to think about when you have the long-term cultural change that really gets the American people on the side of civil rights, that makes the appeals of the 1960s effective, that groundwork is laid in the 1950s. And we give Truman credit for announcing the integration of the armed forces, but he didn't actually integrate the armed forces. It actually took place under the Eisenhower administration. Truman issued the orders, but then didn't really do much to follow up on it. So it's that slow, and he always explained it in moral terms of like, and he would do this very clever thing that I always thought was really interesting. He would always couple, when he talked about civil rights, he would couple it with things that people already agreed with. So he would always couple civil rights with religious freedoms for churchgoers. And you look back on his speeches and you say, well, why would he do this? And it's because people already wanted and understood that they valued their own religious freedoms. And so he was building upon beliefs that people already had and saying, so you already believe in this version of freedom. I'm just telling you that civil rights for Black people is the same as your religious rights that you already agree with. And that kind of thing sinks in over a longer period of time. It gets everyone who's a decent person on your side.
So, Professor, would you, I haven't thought of it this way from Eisenhower, but is it almost a direct link of philosophical and also human nature perspective between Eisenhower and what Lincoln did?
Yes. Yes.
I wouldn't have thought of it except for the books that you made me read on Lincoln.
Well, I was just going to say, and there was this letter that Eisenhower wrote. Somebody had written to him criticizing Lincoln. And Eisenhower said in response, he really you can almost tell he was a little bit angry with the attack on Lincoln. He said that Lincoln was the most astute master of political expediency. And he goes on to describe how what Lincoln would do is build upon what people already believe. And in essence, he was saying, this is what I'm trying to do. And I'm using Lincoln as my model, because this is what he did. And that's what I'm trying to do, is to try to excite, again, what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature, right? You take, what is it that's good? What's the good version of you? How do we excite the good version of you and get you thinking with the best version of yourself about how to make life better?
Awesome. I've got a series of questions, so forgive me for interrupting this train. This was still your intro, so to speak, but it's been a good intro. I'd like to go way back in history now, to see if there's something that you can unite us. And you've alluded to this in previous conversations, but we're talking about the meaning of words. And even with a political science degree and a law degree and a lifetime spent in public policy and politics, these aren't my words. I don't use these in a normal discussion and dialogue. And I'd like you to see if you can bridge between way past and today in words that may unite us. So, federalism and anti-federalism. Wait, we hate each other in America? We've been doing this a long time? Or, well, wait, no, John, you're completely misunderstanding. Those are different ways to get to similar points. Is there any relevance to federalism and anti-federalism today, or are those ancient words?
Well, sure, because if you imagine the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debate, it was over how to implement a common set of beliefs. And in other words, they're both arguing about what is the best way to balance the ideals that are in the American Declaration. So you begin with, and it seems strange because we start with, here's what you must tolerate, and then here's what's outside of what we must tolerate. You have to. It's like the early creeds of the Christian church. You do have to have a creed, and you say, and you have to first say, this is what we are and who we are. And when people argue from outside of that, you say, well, that's fine, but just understand that you are outside the American political tradition. So anybody who's arguing about how to balance the ideals of the Declaration has a claim on being a patriotic American. And so anyone who is a liberal or an American liberal or an American conservative is arguing about how to best balance the ideals of the Declaration, and they are in the American family. And Federalists and Anti-Federalists are arguing about how to best implement the ideals of the Declaration. And Federalists are the ones who thought it was in the Constitution, and Anti-Federalists wanted some additional guarantees in order to ratify the Constitution, and with a couple of modifications, and most notably the Bill of Rights, it answered enough of the Anti-Federalist criticism that the Constitution became popular enough to pass. And
so, Professor, you're arguing that those ancient and American history words and papers, those ideas, are just as valid today as they were a couple hundred years ago.
Yes, absolutely.
So let me take a modern topic, and we don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole because we've discussed it several times. And I'm going to go backtrack again, but let's go to modern stuff. I'm talking CRT, critical race theory, and banning books or banning podcasts or legitimate political discourse. We've got just this week the most prominent Republican in the country, the minority leader of the Senate, being attacked by the past president, 2 Republicans, over these kind of issues. I kind of think it's outside the bounds of rational discourse. Violence isn't, in current terms, isn't included. So do the words mean anything in the RNC resolution? Yeah, I kind of think they do. It's really bad phrasing. They wrote it. It's not like somebody else put it in their mouth and they accidentally signed on it. They wrote it and approved it. It was dumb. Now we can say, did they mean it? I don't know whether they meant it or not, but you can just read the words. In fact, my former party, your current party, is the party of strict constructionalists. And I mean, like, words have meaning. The Bible has meaning, and so does the Constitution. And now, well, no, we didn't mean what we said. I don't mean to go down this rabbit hole, but I use those couple things, CRT and book banning, and as examples of how we seem to be getting this wrong. So how do we take what's right in our country and find some common bond over the words?
I think that there's no shortcut. There is no royal road to this other than getting back to understanding our pluralistic system. And I think one of the things that damages us the most is and this is going to sound like a strange thing to attack, but I know I've mentioned this before, but this notion that we have that your political beliefs exist on a political spectrum, that somehow liberals and conservatives, American liberals and American conservatives are somehow the opposites of one another. And I just think, there's nothing more damaging than this belief somehow that if you're on the left, that your beliefs are somehow related to people who are liberals. That to me is mind-boggling. And so that somehow if you're on the right, you are conservative. These things are just mind-boggling to me, as if somehow I believe in individual liberty so much that I'm going to wake up and want a monarchy. And I believe so much in majoritarian democracy that I'm going to wake up in the morning and want to abolish property rights. Like those things are not true. And yet we teach in college courses and Facebook memes and online tests of where your political beliefs exist on the political spectrum. And then then you'll get the one that says, oh no, it's actually on it's a four-way chart with authoritarianism and libertarianism.
It's a libertarian chart, yeah.
And I just think all of these things are incredibly damaging. And it's ahistorical because, as Jefferson said, the Declaration of Independence is an expression of the American mind. So if you reject the Declaration, you're un-American. And if you embrace the Declaration, you're an American. But embracing the Declaration means embracing all of the principles. I mean, one of my favorite speeches, we mentioned it last week, Calvin Coolidge on the Declaration, where he says that about the Declaration, it is exceedingly restful. In other words, if all men are created equal, that is final. If governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. There is no progress that you can make beyond these principles. People who think that they have some sort of belief system that's better, in Coolidge's words, and I would agree, they cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionaries. So when people say, oh, we need to fight fire with fire, right? We need to stop being conservatives and we need to be members of the right. I would say, no, there's no version of my principles that says you get to abandon your principles in order to fight for your principles. That to me just seems absurd.
And so you're saying it in a much more positive way than this question suggests. As you say, in Facebook and media and letters to the editor and prominent columnists much of the time seem to say liberal in a label pejorative way, in a bludgeon way, say they really have switched from being liberal to socialist to communist. And let's just plain use it now. They're just socialist. No, they're not even socialists, they're communists. Say Republicans or conservatives or or the right. And very similarly, the left says they're conservatives, Republicans. No, they're fascists. Let's admit it, that they are dictatorship. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. They are nothing to do with the former Republican Party of old. They are now fascists or some other dictatorial bludgeon. Why is everybody doing that, though? We already talked about it. It's politics and money, fundraising. I get it. But how is this benefiting our children and our children's children? How are we making more freedom? How are we holding this light out to the world about what self-determination can be? I just don't get it. I don't understand why we're so angry and so hate-filled all across the spectrum. Help us.
Well, I guess I would say sometimes the first thing I would say is if somebody, you want to call somebody a name or something like that, or put a label on them, the first thing I would just ask is that how they define themselves? In other words, if you have a concern that someone is a socialist, you should ask them, do you really want to use the democratic process in order to abolish the idea of in order to abolish the idea of property,
private property?
Yeah, private property. And if the answer is yes, then you are a socialist, and your ideas are antithetical to the ideas of the founding. And I don't have any problem at all, speaking plainly about that issue. And if
not even in a hate-filled way, it's just a kind of a matter of fact. There are socialists out there, and if you proclaim to be one and are,
yeah, I will take you at your word.
Yeah.
If you say that you're a Nazi and that I will believe you. I mean, I think too often we tie ourselves in knots, especially in academics, in telling people, oh no, that's not really what you are, or I remember, this is going to sound like a strange example, but after 9/11, I would do these panels and people would say, oh, why is Al-Qaeda doing this? And I would say, well, here's what they said. And they say, yeah, but couldn't it also be poverty and Israel? And I said, no, it's this. Like, believe them. When they say why they're doing what they're doing, believe them. Like, we want there to be other reasons that we can control. And often there aren't. And I think it's more productive to begin by believing someone when they tell you why they're doing something.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Maya Angelou quote. That you're paraphrasing. So Professor, I've got in team. I want you all to start asking questions anytime now, but especially 3 or 4 or 5 minutes from now. Let me just lay out a couple quick things. The banned books and cancel culture all around. It's kind of weird, isn't it? How we're using words that we mean in one way, but then when it flips and it's attacking our team, we don't mean it anymore. Isn't it kind of across the spectrum? We've just thrown out the meaning of words. We don't care anymore.
Oh, of course. I mean, and I was thinking about this too, that everyone who had a problem with Chaz taking over the center of Seattle during the protests there, they don't seem to have any problem at all with Canadian truckers. And I just remember thinking like, I seem to remember that you said all these things about how you felt about people taking over a portion of a city and why, and I don't know. I think that's a really recent example of something that's happening right now with the people who are going out of their way to praise what Canadian truckers are doing. I would be interested to go back and see how they describe the events in Seattle.
And the same thing with even more dramatic, the BLM riots, not the BLM parades, but the BLM riots versus the insurrection at the Capitol. I mean, it's just both sides just ignore their own. So
I would also say, again, let's get back to Eisenhower. It seems like he struck the right balance, and he gave a speech in which he said, don't join the book burners. And what people found frustrating at the time was that they said, oh, why won't Eisenhower go after McCarthy directly? And Eisenhower privately said, well, why would I get into the gutter with him? I'm the president. He's a senator, and he would point to the people in the media and say, you're the ones who made him famous, not me. I'm doing everything I can to address the issue. But Eisenhower would never, he said, engage in personalities. So he would only engage in issues and principles, but never in personalities. But people wanted it so badly to just, lower the hammer on McCarthy, and he wouldn't do it.
Fascinating.
And it ended up being the far more effective way to take McCarthy down.
Okay. Let me do three more things, just the importance of words, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Pro-choice versus pro-life. I happen to kind of like that words because they're the audiences on both sides. They say this is what we want to be defined as: pro-life and pro-choice. Okay, I'll call you whatever you want to be called. The movements. Are those accurate? Is that okay to call people what they want to be called? Or should we really define words in a different way than the teams want to define themselves?
That's one of those issues where it does seem like when you drill down on the actual belief systems and what they would advocate and what they want done, I do think that's one of those issues where the labels have tended to obscure large areas of agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's done that way in terms of public polling. But I would also say that seems to be on the decline. One of the things that has been interesting in voter surveys over the past few election cycles is how little, at least the pro-life movement, how much, it's still for the pro-choice movement, an issue that excites them. But certainly on the pro-life side, the issue has been going down in terms of significance. And I wonder if that's, I don't know what
is it because they have a 6-3 majority in the court and Roe may be overturned? Sorry to be blunt about it, but
maybe, and I was just going to punt with my history answer and say, I'll tell you in 20 years. Like, I don't know. All I know is that it's a data point now, and I need to think about it for a couple of days.
Yeah. Let me give you another underline, because we don't talk about this directly, like you and I have been doing. We talk about some pretty substantive issues: abortion and gays and guns, and we don't hate each other, and our audience doesn't seem to attack us. I don't know. We just talk about issues that are important. So let me give you one that guns. We must ban semi-automatic weapons, say my liberal friends. And I have a ton of liberal friends. I like them. They're friends, not Facebook friends, friends. And if it's appropriate, I say, well, you don't actually mean what you just said, do you? And you go, yes, we do. We have to ban semi-automatic weapons. And I go, you do know what a semi-automatic weapon is, don't you? And they go, yeah, it's an assault rifle. Well, and also every handle minus every handgun minus revolvers is a semi-automatic weapon. You don't mean that, right? Well, oh, what? They think everything's an automatic versus semi-automatic. And automatic, you have to have a permit, a special permit for in America. So why are we not able to identify terms that actually make sense? Is that intentional? Are we being manipulated by either the American Rifle Association or whatever the former governor of New York's association is against guns? Why are we not using words that are accurate so people actually understand what automatic versus semi-automatic means?
I think I have two responses. Number one is, if I want to have a constructive conversation on these issues, the first thing I do is I ask questions and try to listen. And especially if you can get a couple of people who disagree with you at the same time, one of the things that I found is really effective is I just say, how? What is your definition of what do you think what is it that you think you are advocating? And then how would we go about doing this? And when you begin asking people, just probing a little bit for depth, I think what you find is that you can clarify some of these issues along the way when they're in a mindset where they're already more interested in constructive solutions. So then you say, okay, well, it's easy to say ban semi-automatic weapons. All right, what do you think a semi-automatic weapon is? And then when you say ban it, what exactly do you mean? And then people will sometimes say, well, it means that no, you can't sell anymore, right? You cannot manufacture, you cannot sell. You cannot, and okay, well, how would you get them, do you want to go door to door and search people's homes, or what is your constructive solution for how this would actually be accomplished? And what you find is that once you begin engaging in that sort of thing, sorry, I got somebody, it looks like they're looking at my solar panels to clean them.
It could be a thief.
Yeah, well, somebody's climbing up on my roof right now.
Yeah, I'd get out your semi-automatic weapon.
Just so you know, I'm talking about guns and stuff, and you're just like, somebody's crawling up on my roof right now.
Right. It's your private property.
Yeah, talking about private property. And anyway, but my answer, just to summarize, is just get people talking about how they want to do things, and you'll find that they're already in a much more constructive mindset.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So thank you. The Patriot Act, isn't that neat? We're both patriots in the proper definition of patriotism. But why do we label things to make sure that if you vote against it, you're going to get kicked out of office? I mean, really, this is not better angel stuff. Yes, we want to be protected against terrorists, but yes, we also don't want the government to spy on private citizens without a judge warrant. I mean, that's pretty simple. Didn't I just say two things that are kind of at conflict? Well, we figure those things out, but that's not how we do things. We label it in a way that if you vote against it, you're going to be toast, either in a primary or in the general. Do we have to do this, or is there can't we just have like peace? Is it possible to have a country with some peace in it?
Of course. And I do think that we get into this, there's a joke that, I never tire of making fun of like church youth pastors and what they think is cool, and I sometimes one of my favorite, I don't know which comedian said it, but he said that something was as hip as a youth pastor's belt. And I just remember thinking, like, this is as uncool. I can't imagine anything as uncool as like a youth pastor's belt.
Yeah, that is funny.
But I think people get into this sort of advertising and marketing mindset where they think this stuff works and that they have to do it. And in many cases, they do it because there's no penalty for not doing it. And you get to claim to be clever and all that. But I really wonder if any of it matters.
Sure seems
did a single vote change on the Patriot Act because it was called the Patriot Act? Did a single vote flip anywhere in America because of the name of that bill? Like, I find it really hard to believe. So why do they do it? I don't know, because it feels good, and you get to claim that people who, it feels good to claim that your opponents are unpatriotic.
Right. But there are very few steadfast. I don't mean to keep going back to these people, Justin Amash and Senator Sass, and you. I mean, but there's very few people that are mostly, philosophically consistent. I'm sure you got all sorts of problems in your life. But in public policy and persona and how we should engage as a nation, it seems like there's very few people that have the long-term interests of the country at heart. I mean, they do say the right stuff to appeal to their tribe. I get it. But do they really think about how we're different than China and Russia? I don't mean to attack two dictatorial regimes, but they are two dictatorial regimes, and there is a difference between our government and probably a majority of the world in the way they live. And why are we fighting these fights, the fights we fight that I've been giving, when there's a bigger fight that maybe we won't exist in 5 or 50 or 500 years? In fact, if history is any judge, we won't exist in 500 years, maybe 50. And I hope we do, because I won't be alive. But how do we do the right thing and use our words in the right way, Professor? We've got to get back on track. Is my premise of this whole show, is somehow we've got to put the money and the time and the attention on people that are doing things long term for the good of people or society or history, not just the next election or the next quarterly stock earnings report or the next performance evaluation. They're just
Well, I lost the last bit of what you said, but I think because it's such a beautiful day out, I'm going to be a little more optimistic and say that the American people are probably already doing their part. And they are already voting for the least crazy candidate in most election cycles. What's failing us now is, I think that right now the politicians and the parties are failing us with a failure of imagination to give the American people credit for this. I think they are not seeing what is actually happening, because if another way to look at the election results over the last say 8 years is that in almost every case, the American people are voting for the least crazy candidate. And if you don't see that, it's probably because of your own political biases. In other words, if you look and say, well, that wasn't true between Trump and Clinton, I say, well, maybe you're not really seeing Clinton the way that most Americans saw Hillary Clinton, and the same would go for Trump versus Biden. If you think that Trump, after 4 years of actually being in office, had demonstrated that he was less crazy than Joe Biden, I would say you're not accurately looking at what his 4 years in office were like. So in both cases, I think this is, I think, what's also happening. I mean, think about the fact that the Republicans should have control of the Senate, and they should be able to take control of the Senate relatively easily, and they might not. And the only people who can blow it are the Republicans themselves. And hopefully, I mean, I've noticed, for instance, Democratic governors are ending mask mandates and starting to, come around on things like schools and
that's right,
and defund the police. Or they're running away from that now. And so in every case, I'm hoping that my friend Jeff Bloodworth, who we had on talking about this issue, I'm hoping he's right. that the American people are going to force our politicians into being a little bit better.
Oh my gosh. I almost want to end on that optimistic standpoint, but I'm going to give you one bite at the apple to be pessimistic. I think you might be able to stick with your optimism on this. Okay. Joe Rogan. Is it Joe Rogan? I don't listen to him, but I've listened to a couple of his things recently just because everybody was talking about him. Is he a racist or is he, And so I listened to his defense, and I've listened to some of the attacks. Clearly, millions of people like Joe Rogan. And I get the instinct that the reason they like him is he's kind of a straight shooter. He just talks kind of like what we do. Maybe he says stupid stuff, he does. And maybe we say stupid stuff, and we probably do. And maybe he's really smart, and I think he is. But do we need to cancel him? Or do we need to have him stop saying and I mean specifically, some of his stuff on racism? Yeah, it probably was racist. And I'm not calling Joe Rogan a racist. And I'm using all this very intentionally, Professor, because I want your reaction. Right now, we either want to bandy about words. That's a racist statement, or you're a racist. Or is there a different way to use words to accomplish the goal of the Declaration? I mean, is there a way to call to our better angels and actually pull people onto our side regarding this ideal of America and also the problem of America? How do we achieve our higher calling regarding race and racism? And I use Joe Rogan as an example because the former president says, stop it, never apologize, you're great, everything you say is amazing. Well, we know that's not true. And we kind of hear his excuses, and they might be mostly true. Can you give us a perspective on where we should be when we say stupid stuff? Are we banned forever? Can we fix ourselves? Can we do better? I mean, why do we all have to be this all or nothing society? Regarding words, how do we help each other be better? I'm teeing you up for optimism.
Well, I guess I don't know that there's a I guess I would say commit oneself to a a mindset of always being skeptical of a single data point and always wanting to put that data point into context. Because one of the things that happens so often in our current media environment is that the thing that gets rewarded is the headline, the reaction, the Twitter response,
sound bite, yeah,
sound bite, right? And my kind of go-to move when I hear about any controversy is to just assume that there's probably a context that I'm missing, and then I try to. Are you asking like how I personally approach these?
advice to us as Americans on how to fulfill America's promise. How do we be that shining city on the hill that Jake posted earlier? I mean, how do we do better in all this stuff? You're the historian, teach us.
But the answer is not, I guess it's historical. Be nice and leave people alone. I don't, there are so many things that we act like that require a political response. I've often thought about, when there's a call to ban something at a statewide level or a call to implement something at a statewide level. And I remember I used to use this example when the transgender bathrooms was like a controversy and stuff. And I just remember thinking, one thing we could do is just be nice. That in most circumstances, if you approach people with kindness and say, I don't know, what bathroom would you like to use? And as long as they are respectful, you say, do we need a federal law about something that can be handled with some simple human decency? If it arises and then say, well, we're going to try being nice first, and then if this problem rises to the level of an abuse of rights or someone's rights require protection by authorities, is this something that could be handled at the school? Is this something that could be handled by the city? Is this something that could be handled by the county? Is this something that could be handled by the state? In other words, not everything rises to the level of being a federal law.
Or a United Nations resolution.
Right. And in fact, there's an old Lincoln, I think it was a Lincoln speech where he says, do we really have to trouble ourselves about the oyster laws of New England or something, and the same goes for international relations. One of my old professors used to say that, who studied Soviet history, he would always say that Americans believe that every sparrow that falls from the sky is the fault of America, and I always liked I liked Lincoln saying that he doesn't need to trouble himself about the oyster laws in one part of the
book
world.
You're making me read on Coolidge now has a similar quote. I don't want to go to that national disaster because I don't want to make it a national issue. It's a local and regional issue. I don't want to federalize everything.
Yeah. And so, again, committing ourselves to first being nice and seeing if being nice and treating each other with a little bit of grace and also a little humility. I'm sure because in addition to this webcast, I do this podcast, and I'm lucky that when I do the podcast, it's edited. But I think that I've probably said things that, if taken out of context, would be wildly offensive. And I would probably said things that are wrong. And the only reason why I quote unquote get away with it is because nobody cares, Yeah. And I hope that whatever I do or whatever mistakes that I make and have made in the course of even this conversation, that I'm trying and my heart's in the right place, I think. So I hope that people would give me a little grace because I'm trying to do the right thing, I think.
Yeah, Professor, I had that same, it wasn't a nightmare, it was more of a daydream at night. But I had that same, because of the Joe Rogan experience and looking back over his 12 years of podcasts, or however long he's been doing it. And there's no doubt we have said stuff that could be taken out of context or may even be inappropriate. I don't know. Like, I don't like
Sometimes
cursing.
I just misspeak. I mean, this
Yeah.
is the other.
Yeah.
You know, I have friends who listen to the other podcast I do, and they'll like send me a text with my actual quote, and
you go, yikes.
Yeah, did I say that? You know, they'll
Yeah,
go
yeah,
back
yeah.
and listen, like, oh, I didn't finish my thought, or I didn't
Right.
finish the sentence, and I say, yes, I literally did say this. And if you
Yeah.
take the quote out of context, they're like, oh, I did.
Well, I'm very similar. I love cursing. I just said I hate cursing earlier. No, I love cursing, but in private among friends. But cursing online, which I occasionally do, I actually don't like it, and I think it's inappropriate. I just old-fashioned. Anyway, words are so important, and we need to keep going on this conversation, as we do all the time. But I really want to hear from Frank and Ben and Bart, Tony, Jake. We only have 15, 20 minutes left, and I've taken too much of the professor's time. So who's up first? Frank, you are.
Oh, I'm right here. Yeah. So here's the thing, Professor Tootle, when you suggest that it's be kind when we're faced with the dilemma of which bathroom to use with our all of our friends. It happened specifically in Northern Virginia, and the consequences were that the young lady was raped, and the father said, "Whoa, that's not okay." And so you say, okay, that's no problem. We'll have a standalone bathroom. The folks that have, we'll have a separate bathroom with a locked door, and anybody who chooses to use that special locked door bathroom can use that bathroom. And yet the folks that are in a marginalized community, LGBTQ, say, no. That stigmatizes us because we can't use the bathroom that other people use. How does being nice fix that sticky situation?
Well, I guess I'll go the other direction and remind you of this thing that happened when George Bush was governor of Texas, and there was a hate crime that took place, and the NAACP ran these horrible ads against George W. Bush where they said, when George W. Bush banned hate crimes legislation, it was like having my father dragged behind that truck again. And it came up during the debates and George W. Bush said, I was governor when this happened, and I signed the death warrants of these people who committed these crimes. And he said, what do you want me to do? Kill them again? And people kind of made fun of him for being glib about the death penalty. But I think his point was well taken. Making something that is already illegal more illegal doesn't actually solve any problems. Rape and sexual assault are already illegal. And it might make us feel better to pass more laws to make those crimes more illegal than they already are. But when somebody commits we already have a law against sexual assault. And I don't know that the existence or non-existence of the bathroom situation would have prevented someone who wanted to commit a sexual assault.
Complex topic.
Sure.
Frank, give a retort real quick.
I'm the dad who had my daughter raped, and I hear what you said, but boy, I'm coming out with this.
I hear you.
Yeah, okay.
I hear you.
Thanks.
So let me ruin it for both of you, because this won't help either one of you.
Thank you.
I remember vividly being a 18-year-old at Folsom Stadium up in Boulder, and they didn't have enough women's bathrooms, and men had plenty of urinals. And I remember vividly women coming into the men's bathroom, and some were peeing in the sinks. And as a young man, this is kind of exciting. This is interesting. This is fun. I'm telling you, now in the Army, they had one to the left and the right and forward to the left and the right. We all sat in there together in a gang. I mean, like there was like 12 of us all going together, sitting down. And I'm telling you, I want private bathrooms. I just do. Each individual stall should be a locked stall. I want privacy, and I know it's more expensive. I used to be against this, But I'm telling you, I used to be against sidewalks that had the Americans with Disabilities thing. So you could, and now that I see skateboarders and bikes and wheelchairs, and yeah, we should have made them that way, and they should eventually be fixed. I just think people's private function should be private. And I think we can solve this in another way, by the way, Frank, is what I'm saying. I just don't think it has to be a trans, anti-trans, or gay or anti-gay. I think that people want privacy.
Well, I see the logic of a unisex bathrooms with private stalls. I think
every one of them.
The answer.
Yeah.
Every one of them.
But I get my larger point is you don't that in terms of crimes. When people experience horrific crimes, we might, if there is a deficiency in the law that says that somehow something that is unjust is somehow legal, then we should address that deficiency in the law. But when somebody has been convicted of a crime, there's no further punishment that will ever make us feel better. You know, there's when somebody has been murdered, there's no law we can pass that can unmurder that person.
And Frank, I really appreciate you raising this issue, because both sides use it as a bludgeon, and for personal and legitimate reasons. And I hope I was able to articulate that there may be some third option to answer that question. But Professor, thanks for answering Frank's question. I love the use of words, and let's figure out how to solve problems. Excellent, excellent. Are you comfortable, Frank and Professor? Okay, who's up next? We only have 10 minutes left, y'all. Bart, you're trying to get yourself off mute. I can tell by the grimace in your face.
No, here's my quick question. I first want to say, before I ask this questions, I want to compliment Jake on all the show notes he's putting into the chat.
Yeah.
It's amazing how quickly you can do that. You're just awesome at that.
And make sure you cut and paste those, Jake, because I'm not sure YouTube keeps them. Make sure you create a separate document so when you go back through, I'm telling you, it's a brilliant compliment, Bart. Well done, Jake. Go ahead, Bart.
Just fantastic. My question, Professor, is what would you recommend? What kind of changes would you recommend? I think I would have to put it in the context of our higher education system, you know, both public colleges, universities, and private ones. Yeah, you know, when I was in college, I majored like John in political science and all that. And one of the classes, well, it was actually a couple of classes I had to take, were in political theory. You know, I had to read John Locke and, you know, John Stuart Mill and Karl Marx, yes. And we even read Mein Kampf, which was, you know, I'm a Jewish person, so that was weird reading Mein Kampf. But, you know, I personally believe people should be educated in these things because they are major, I don't know, lines of political thought that really do affect the discussion that goes on and how we talk to people about these things. And I know my kids, you know, they're in their early 20s now. They didn't have much exposure to these various political philosophies. And sometimes it's hard for me to communicate with them about, you know, what is socialism? Well, if you listen to what Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump say, you're not going to learn a whole lot about what socialism is all about, because neither one of those people do a very good job of explaining anything, you know? And if you haven't read, what's his name, Adam Smith, you're not going to understand capitalism. What's your feeling on all of that?
And Professor, I've got an answer to this question too. So give a brief one and then let me jump in and then see if you want to argue with Bart and me.
The first thing I would do is I would put it into state law in every single state that every publicly funded college in that state must employ a full-time tenured professor with a specialist, with a PhD in political history, diplomatic history, and military history. That there is no substitute for having people who actually have an expertise in political, diplomatic, and military history teaching at especially the flagship colleges and the colleges that that produce most of the teachers. And I would also say, don't ignore the community college system as well. And then I would say the next thing is that there's absolutely, well, I shouldn't say absolutely, there is very little need for adjuncts in the teaching of history. And so I would make every single college in America commit to not having more than 25% of student contact hours taught by a part-time instructor. And, oh, go ahead.
Well, now I'm going to argue with you. Ready?
Yeah.
So Bart, brilliant question, but Professor, you're not going to like this answer, I don't think. I was shocked. I was in my third year of law school when I enlisted for the first Persian Gulf War, and I'm a private PFC in the United States Army, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Echo 128 in June of 1991. And I remember vividly a black drill sergeant from down south somewhere teaching a class on the Geneva Convention and how we can't kill and hurt people if they throw up their arms, even though they just killed our buddy and we're in a firefight and they throw up their arms, wave a white flag, whatever, their weapon's not there. We cannot kill them, even though they just killed our friend, even though our right arm is off. We can't kill them. And the privates are all excited. And he was going, yeah, but telling you America's different. We're founded on principles. We're founded on the rule of law. We have a constitution. We're a signatory to the Geneva Convention, and we don't care that other countries are not signatories or are terrorists or are thugs or brutal or whatever they are. We don't care. We are different in America, and you're a United States soldier, and you're not going to do that because you have an oath of office. And these are just privates and basic training. I was going, oh my God, this is just completely wonderful. What the United States Army is teaching young men and women with not even a high school diploma yet. I don't think we need college professors to teach ethics and history. Yes, we do. Obviously, I picked you for a reason to do these conversations. But I think we all have a role to play in this great experiment of ours. I'll shut up just because I've taken too much time.
But say, of course, however, if you want to get at most students go to school and their teachers went to college, and teachers can't teach things they don't know. And last year in America, there were 0 tenure track jobs in political history.
That's crazy. Okay, that's crazy. I think we both have valid points. No, you won't give me, but you have a valid point, Professor.
No, but I also think here's where I will agree with you. I do think one of the things that is in the decline, and I agree with some of our AEI friends, that Americans are no longer participating in character shaping institutions, and that each of these, that I would love it if more Americans participated in character shaping institutions, and each of those things has a role to play in creating better citizens and better people, and also happier people too. I think that all the research on happiness would indicate that you end up being a happier person when you live a life where you're engaged in character shaping institutions.
And character shaping institutions, for newcomers, if they ever watch this, are family, faith, Boy Scouts, service organizations, military. Yeah, yes. Cool. All right. Ben, Jake, Tony, last questions. We're already at 1 hour in. Ben, I think I can tell by the age of people when all of a sudden they start stressing out, they're trying to find their computer keyboard. Ben?
No, I know where my computer keyboard is.
I know. Sorry to be a jerk. I was a jerk. Sorry. And you have a question?
No, I was more of a comment. We're talking about words, and I can't help but think social media has really degraded our ability to carry on a conversation like we're carrying on now. People are not afraid of speaking their mind on social media, where if I walk up to you, John, and I say the same thing, you're probably going to deck me and I'll never get up. Social media has really changed the way we talk. And can you comment on how we can fix that?
Versus Thomas Paine's anonymous, how has it changed?
Well, in some ways, I think it's one of those. Here's another point of optimism. I think, just the weather being nice, I'm in a good mood. But I mean, I love having my windows open and the sun shining and fresh air and all that stuff. So, in a way, we might be complaining about a thing that has already run its course. Facebook is on the decline. People aren't engaging in comment sections, and the media environment is becoming even more fragmented than it was 3 years ago. And so we might be doing what the Justice Department was doing with Microsoft after the rise of Apple. We're complaining about Facebook comment threads, and really, I don't know that. And Twitter, Twitter is the same thing. In the last election, one of the most effective things Joe Biden's campaign did was they said, we're going to ignore Twitter. And we're going to focus on voters, because so few people are. When you look at the number of Americans who are actively engaged in political activity on the internet, it is a tiny fraction.
Is it like 7% or 3% or 1%?
I think it's less than that even. Maybe Jake can look this up, but because it was all these stats were all over the internet in the last campaign. But how many people on Twitter are highly engaged in political activities, and what that represents as a share of the electorate is just a tiny fraction. And a lot of it comes from the fact that because we are highly engaged in political, we tend to think that this is bigger than it really is, for the same reason why the media always focuses on elite institutions instead of community colleges and state colleges, because they all went to elite institutions. So I think that what matters more is what's happening at Fresno State and the University of Northern Colorado and North Dakota State, because that's where most Americans go to. Most people who end up becoming teachers, that's where they go to school, but the media tends to focus on whatever's going on at Harvard and Princeton and Yale, and so we're probably doing the same thing with media. So maybe it isn't as bad as we think.
All right. And Jake did post something, but I've got to see if Jake or Tony has a quick question before we end. Tony, you're good?
Well, I want to hear Jake. Jake, can you tell us what's in that Pew Research article about the small share of U.S.?
Not only do we want you to find it, we want you to analyze it for us.
Well, not analyze it, just summarize it or give me the headline of it.
Okay, so the Pew Research, it says the majority of political tweets that people do during election season, let's see, 97% of those tweets are created by the most active 10% of users. So the most active 10% of people on Twitter, so like 1% of the US population, since 10% of the population is an active monthly Twitter user, 97% of the tweets are created by 1% of the active Twitter users in America.
All right, that raises a question for me though, Professor. Facebook is either intentionally or unintentionally showing me something called Reels, and I don't know what they are, but they're in my Facebook feed, and so I've looked at some of them. And there's some really cool ski crashes, and there's some great NBA throws, and there's a bunch of fairly pretty, Meredith, women that are in bikinis. And I looked at them, and I kind of think of the dumbing down of America. I want more people to be involved in political discourse, not less. And so, yes, we can be attuned to some, titillating experiences of life or something. And it's okay. It's part of the human condition. I get it. Modeling is a legitimate profession. Bikini swimsuit selling is a legitimate profession. I just don't know if it's our highest calling. I want more people to be involved in in-depth political discussion for humanity's sake, because the whole history of the human race has been one brutal dictator of whatever stripe or another, brutalizing people that they don't hate, or they hate because it's not benefiting their family. I'm paraphrasing your philosophy. Well, this is an exception for the last couple hundred years. It's worth celebrating. Let's put that on a pedestal. Let's brag about that. Let's fight for that. And it doesn't seem like many people are interested. So help us out. And with an optimistic answer.
It really has to be reflective of the culture, which I think in most cases, most Americans still have and share American values, but we are being failed by our institutions. So what I think we need are institutions that reflect the political culture of the American people. And it is a shame when our political parties have failed us, and it's a shame when our institutions fail us. The educational institutions of America are failing us. Other than saying that we need to have these things reconciled again, I don't know of any, again, no royal road. I just, I think about, for instance, the mask mandates and the COVID restrictions and how polarizing these issues can seem, but reality has a way of intervening on your ideology, and some of the people who were so ardently saying that every American must be vaccinated and must wear a mask when driving alone in their cars, ended up getting Omicron, and some of the people who were ardently opposed to masks, and well, they ended up getting Omicron too. And everyone gets humbled by reality, and there's really no way of escaping reality and the humiliation that comes with living life. Maybe not humiliation, but just the humbling that comes with living life. And all I would hope for is that people have some sort of systemic way of looking at their own belief systems in a regular way. I mean, that's kind of why Arthur Brooks says, when he's advocating for things like happiness, they always put weekly religious practice as one of the requirements to any, and like Eisenhower said, everybody should have a faith, I don't care what it is. It's really that weekly reflection on yourself that that helps you process all the ways that reality has humbled you. And I think that reflecting upon the ways that reality has humbled you is one of the only paths towards, treating other people decently.
Yeah, Professor, thank you for your discussion on words and then leading to actions, behavior then actions. I hope you all have found some value in this today. Professor, your ability to go back into Lincoln or Coolidge or, and give us some perspective on current day events, I think it just adds wisdom to our lives. So when we chat with our loved ones and friends, acquaintances and strangers, we might be doing so in a better way. So thank you.
Well, I want to heap a little praise on our panelists and on you, because this has really been on my mind. I sent you a little message the other day, but I really think it's extraordinary what you guys are doing. I think about, you guys love America, and you love the idea of other people thriving so much that you dedicate this time to come together to just think through these issues of how can we do this better. And I just feel like what you guys are doing is just extraordinary. I mean, what an act of, I mean, none of you are getting paid, none of you, I mean, and yet you keep coming back here to do this, and it really is amazing. I just wanted you guys, all of you, to know how much I appreciate you and how much I recognize that what you are doing is born out of a profound love of other people. And that deserves some credit. So thank you to all of you guys.
I love that. Professor, thank you for complimenting Frank, Bart, Tony, Jake, Ben, and a variety of other people that have joined us over the course of the last year. And we don't plan on finishing yet. We've got a variety of topics coming up. There is a chance we may take off next Friday because I'm just maybe out of pocket. Can you commit to 2 weeks from now, Professor?
I hope so. I don't know. You're asking me 2 weeks from now. I assume I am, but
we'll post on Tootle Talks. Friends, if you like this, if you'll do us consider doing one favor. I did this about a year ago and haven't done it since. And that's just simply posting, hey, I'm involved in a weekly discussion group with a professor of history and hope you might enjoy it. And then send them to the link of Tootle Talks, the Facebook group or the YouTube channel, or both. You don't have to, or you can do it by phone or call them. I mean, it doesn't matter. Handshakes still work. But if you'll consider getting a couple more people involved, we'd deeply appreciate that. Professor, that's such a nice compliment to people that I know dearly. Thank you all for your citizenship. Hope to talk to you soon.